Citizens Climate Lobby. We're starting right on time. Want a mic? Oh, yes. You wouldn't know that this is the first session I've ever moderated. So wish me luck. Our speakers are more experienced than I am, I think. Welcome to our session on climate change and labor challenges and opportunities. My name is Dave Massen, and I'll be moderator for the session. After around 40 minutes of our presentations, there will be the opportunity for questions on the question cards, the way we've been doing throughout the conference. If you have a card already and don't need one, you might write your question down as it occurs to you. And if you hold it up, an intern will collect it. If you don't have a card and need one, likewise you can raise your hand and an intern will bring one to you. Since about this time last year, I've been coordinating CCL's Labor Outreach Action Team. Support from labor will be important to passing our legislation in Congress, and I invite you to join us on Community. Our conference calls are on fourth Mondays of the month. I know at least two of our speakers are expecting and hoping for more jobs and new jobs in a green economy. And we know from our REMI report that we should have, how is this working? I feel like the volume is really going in and out. Okay? Okay, cool. That sounds pretty loud. We know from our REMI report that we should see over 1 million jobs in less than 4 years and over 2 million jobs in less than 9 years. There will be some job losses, of course, but our carbon fee goes up gradually and steadily, and so possibly job losses will also be gradual and a little more manageable than they might be otherwise. Additionally, the REMI report shows us that our policy would keep the labor share of income steady instead of its continuing to decline the way it is now. We're really looking forward to hearing from our speakers about how labor sees climate change and what their organizations are doing. Katie Huffling, on my right, is a certified nurse-midwife and director of the Alliance for Nurses for Healthy Environments. She works with nurses across the country and around the world on a variety of environmental health issues, including fracking, climate change, toxic chemicals, and sustainability in healthcare. As a nurse-midwife, she's concerned with how environmental exposures can impact reproductive health. She has authored a number of peer-reviewed articles on environmental health issues as they relate to pregnancy, and she has also created an assessment tool that can be used by nurses and other clinicians to assess for environmental exposures of pregnant women and prompt the clinician to provide anticipatory guidance. Joseph B. Uehlein, on my left, is founding president and executive director of the Labor Network for Sustainability and Voices for a Sustainable Future. And by the way, he's with us here for a second year, and we really appreciate that. Joe is the former secretary-treasurer of the AFL-CIO's Industrial Union Department and former director of the AFL-CIO Center for Strategic Campaigns. Joe spent over 30 years doing organizing, bargaining, and strategic campaign work in the labor movement. Joe also served on the United Nations Commission on Global Warming from its inception in 1988 through the Kyoto Accords in 1997 and until 2003. He's a founding board member of CERES, Coalition for Environmentally Responsible Economies, and served on the CERES board for 23 years. He is a member of the National Advisory Board of the Union of Concerned Scientists and served as a senior strategic advisor to the BlueGreen Alliance for 5 years. He's a current board member of the U.S. Climate Action Network, of which CCL is also a member. Joe is a musician and a member of the American Federation of Musicians. Lee Anderson, on my right, is Director of Legislation and Policy for the BlueGreen Alliance, currently. Previously, he served as Senior Legislative and Policy Advocate for the BlueGreen Alliance, whose portfolio includes worker health and safety issues, promoting energy efficiency, and responsible waste management. Prior to joining the BlueGreen Alliance, Lee worked as a labor and employment attorney with the Provost Humphrey Law Firm, representing labor unions and individual workers. His law practice centered on union organizing and bargaining, employment discrimination, overtime wages, consumer protections, and pension issues. Typical labor issues if you're informed about that sort of thing. He also taught several courses on these topics as an adjunct lecturer at Middle Tennessee State University. And Lee has advocated for worker rights at both the trial and appellate level in state and federal jurisdictions across the Southeast and Midwestern United States. Lee received a Bachelor of Business Administration degree in finance from Iowa State University in 1990 and a Juris Doctorate degree from the Drake University School of Law in 1995. This is also our second year where BlueGreen Alliance is represented here, and we appreciate that as well. So let's give a warm CCL welcome to our experienced panelists. Go, Katie.
Let's see, that's good. I usually have microphone issues, so I'm always like, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming here today. I think my talk's going to be a little bit different than Lee and Joe's. I work with a number of different nursing organizations on climate change issues, as well as a number of the nursing unions, and I'll be going over some of the things that we've been doing around climate change. And I think some of these will pertain to all of you going to do lobbying tomorrow as well. We've been ramping up our efforts around climate change over the past few years, and we're really starting to get a groundswell of nurses that are passionately working on this issue because we do see the health impacts among our patients and communities. So just a little background on my organization, the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments. We were founded in 2008 after a meeting with most of the major nursing organizations and the nursing unions, some of whom had never done environmental health work before and some who were deeply involved. And they said, we've got so many nurses in the United States, and this is such an important issue that we need to be organizing nurses in an effective manner. And so they felt that we needed a new organization that could be a clearinghouse for information around different environmental health issues. And so out of that, the Alliance was born. And we have both nursing organization members as well as individual nurses who actually do a lot of the work of our organization. And so why nurses? Why should we be the ones kind of helping to lead the charge around climate change and health? Well, for the past 13 years, nurses have rated the highest in the Gallup poll for ethics and integrity. The only year that we haven't ranked the highest was after 9/11 when the firefighters rightfully took that first place, but then we retook it after that. So we're well respected, and when we come to policymakers with a message of health, they really do listen to us. And as you can see, the lowest on there is Congress. They're at like 7%. And so a number of health groups have been addressing climate change within their organizations, but I think it hasn't been until the past few years where it's really come to the public's consciousness that these health organizations are actually finally taking their different policies and actually putting them into practice. So within nursing, we have kind of a basic level of knowledge that we should have when we start practicing. And that's governed by the scope and standards of nursing practice. And we are actually able to get environmental health included in that scope and standard of practice. So it says all nurses should be engaging in advocacy activities around environmental health issues, including climate change. We also were able to pass a policy piece on nurses recognizing, educating, and advocating for healthier energy sources, such as not having any new, not allowing any new fracking to occur until the health and safety of those in the area is assured. So it gives us a nice leg to stand on as we're doing our advocacy pieces. And I really like this quote that social and political advocacy is just another form of caring, because nurses are really known for how caring they are. And so this really shows how we are caring for our patients and communities by being advocates to them with policymakers. So just to give you some context, the two major nursing unions are National Nurses United and SEIU. We've been working with both of those for a number of years, and they've been quite leaders within the healthcare community around environmental health issues, and especially around climate change. Some of the state nurses associations are also unions, so it's a really great resource for us to be able to harness the power of nurses. And also, I forgot to mention, there's over 3 million nurses, and 1 in every 100 Americans is a nurse. So when we're able to use our collective efforts, it's pretty amazing. Oop, that's not supposed to be in there. So this is from a march that occurred in December in LA around climate change. These are nurses from National Nurses United. And I just wanted to read a quote. This is, I think, just highlights how powerful the nursing message is around climate change and health. And so this is from one of the co-presidents of National Nurses United. And she said, "I'm a registered nurse, and our planet is my patient, and it is on life support. As nurses, we see the health consequences from the effects of pollution created by fossil fuels. We deal with the human fallout of climate injustice. Enough is enough. As nurses, we know we must respond by giving care and by protest, protest, protest. We'll never stop protesting." But I love that she's making the analogy that the earth is our patient. And so I think it's such a powerful message. And here's another photo from the People's Climate March. So they had a huge nursing union contingent there, which again is really powerful. Climate change is a healthcare crisis, and really linking nursing practice to climate change, and really making that health message stand out. So my organization, over the past 2 years, we've been really working with nurses around the country on training them to be advocates, and then helping them go and visit with policymakers. And so one of the issues that we've been working on is around the Clean Power Plan. And so working in states, last summer, we were in state houses all over the country, bringing nurses, talking to their policymakers about how the Clean Power Plan will not only bring jobs to their state, but will also improve the health of their constituents. And here's another photo from one of those meetings. And it was really awesome. We all wore scrubs, and we were like little packs of nurses, and we'd get stopped in all the halls. It was really awesome. We also did a big meeting here in DC, doing the same type of thing on Capitol Hill. And we participated in the Moms Clean Air Force plan for clean air. And you can see all the nurses in the back in scrubs. It was a super hot day, so we got like a few photos, and then everyone headed to the shade. So I was got a few. But again, it was really powerful. We had moms and kids and dads all going on to Capitol Hill, talking with their senators, and then the nurses as well. So we were like hitting them from two sides. It was really great. Another policy piece that we're working on that we've been lobbying around is on the new methane rule. Because methane is such a potent greenhouse gas. And then when you have methane emissions from oil and gas development, it's not just by itself, it's also with toxic chemicals that have significant health impacts. And so we're trying to push the Senate to support the EPA rules on the new and modified sources of emissions, but then also to pressure EPA to quickly look at existing sources. And this is from a new map that, or web app that was just released a few days ago, where you can look and see on the map, in your area, if there are oil and gas development sites within a half-mile radius of where you're living, because that's a conservative estimate on how close you may be to be feeling health impacts from that type of industry. And then my final piece is we just pulled together about 20 of the major nursing organizations and nursing unions from around the US for a meeting at the White House talking about climate and health and how we can push this as a policy initiative within those organizations and push it out to their members. And it was extremely well received, and between all of these nursing organizations, we can reach like 1.5 million nurses. And so over the next year, we're going to be really pushing different policy initiatives, as they come forward, and hopefully we'll have a new administration that'll be positive towards that as well. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. Just one more word on the question cards. If your question is directed towards a particular speaker, if you would note that on the top, that can help as well. So let's go with Joe Uehlein.
Okay, thanks. So it's no surprise that two of the unions that are doing the most and best work on climate are nurses' unions. From listening to Katie's presentation, it makes total sense, and clearly the National Nurses United and SEIU are doing a lot of work on climate change, really leading the labor movement in that regard. So I have two words to preface my remarks, and they're the title of a book that one of my colleagues at the Labor Network for Sustainability released about 8 months ago. And those two words are climate insurgency. And the point he makes in his book is that our international institutions have failed us, our national institutions have failed us, and we have to take this matter into our own hands. And I believe he's right about that. I run into a lot of pushback from my labor friends on that concept, because they favor sensible solutions and sort of taking time to put these policies in place. And what I say is, well, that would have been great 30 years ago, but it's not great today. It's really too late for that. I see the T-shirts, zero warming. We got to work for that. And we're already, moving in a fast track toward not a 2C world, a 3C world. So it's the insurgency is something that is real, and it's needed now. And by that, I mean that it's an all hands on deck kind of thing. It doesn't mean we all have to be getting arrested at oil refineries. That's part of it. Well, it's as someone who did get arrested several times protesting the Keystone Pipeline, I have great sympathy with the Break Free movement and the fact that they do risk arrest standing up for what they believe in. At the same time, that approach may not be the best way to build a bridge, say, to the Steelworkers Union, who represents people in refineries. But I'm going to come back to that, because I believe all these things are necessary, and that labor, the movement I come from, really needs to step up to the plate and get over some of the problems that we've got with this. Number one being leave it in the ground. My union, the steelworkers, they don't like that phrase. Certainly the laborers don't, and a lot of the building trades don't. But I don't know anybody who knows anything about climate change that doesn't think we need to leave it in the ground. So, it's sort of we have to evolve, and you all have a role in helping with that, if done the right way. A carbon fee, putting a price on carbon, these are issues that are going to be debated and settled, I hope settled, in the next few years. That's the timeline that science suggests we're on. We don't have forever. I'm starting my timer now late, so I'll know when it gets to 8 minutes, I'm really out of time. So we have a tagline for our organization that is making a living on a living planet. And we look at two big issues: income inequality, the totally legitimate and understandable need that people have to get a job and provide for their families, and climate change. And we believe both can be addressed with the same set of policies. And that's what we work on. It's a very large part of it is our mission. Making a living on a living planet is our one-sentence mission statement. Earlier this year in January, we held the first ever labor convergence on climate, and we invited 75 labor people from around the country to come and spend 2.5 days strategizing. This wasn't an informational conference. Nobody came to learn about climate. We invited labor people who are already working on climate, but to strategize on how to escalate the labor movement's role in the climate protection movement. And it was an amazing 2.5 days. People worked really hard developing and debating the right strategies, and we ended with 6 goals. This is all on our website. 6 goals that everyone agreed to, strategies attached to each goal, a 1-year plan, a 3-year plan, and a 5-year plan. And we're now in the process of organizing the things that everyone agreed to and keeping that process moving. The second convergence will be, I believe, in April of 2017. But this is now a major project of ours, the labor convergence on climate, one that we're putting most of our meager resources into. We also just released our Climate Jobs and Justice project. That's also on the website. And it started with a series of clean energy future reports, one national, and then there's 4 or 5 regional and state level reports. These reports show, and they were designed very specifically to focus on high quality jobs. So we don't get to the 2 million that other studies get to, but we wanted jobs that when labor people look at the report, they say, that's for us. We see our self-interest in those jobs. So our numbers are a little smaller, but they're mostly construction and manufacturing jobs, and that was by design. But it does show how you get to 80% reduction in GHGs by 2050 at no new costs while creating a lot of good, high-quality jobs. We consider it a floor. The no new cost thing is a floor. We need to spend money, a lot of money, addressing this problem so we can do better than even what our clean energy future study shows if we can marshal the will to spend more money. And we believe that we should. There's another article on our website that I co-authored with the former chief economist at the AFL-CIO, Ron Blackwell, called If Not Now, When? A Climate Plan for the Labor Movement. And it outlines, we've always had a critique of labor people who complain about the climate movement. We say, well, what's your plan to address the climate crisis? And there isn't one. So we wrote the start of one just to sort of start the debate going. But it's built around the idea of a national program, marshaling national federal resources in a big way to address mitigation, adaptation, and just transition. This is going to take trillions of dollars. And for anyone who says we can't afford it, all you have to do is point to, just point to the trillion that we're committed to spending and ramping up our nuclear arsenal in the next 8 years. An arsenal that we're supposed to be de-escalating. We're now committed to a $1 trillion ramp up. We can just take that and then a little bit from the Pentagon, and we can take care of the income inequality and the climate crisis with a national program designed to do that. We're now in the midst of the greatest transition in our history, economic, technological. I'm just checking my yeah, okay, all right, I'm doing all right. Economic and technological, the greatest transition in our history, and it's gonna span a lot of industries. So talking about energy is really important, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. So we have an idea of doing a multi-industry study that would look at energy and transportation and waste management and healthcare delivery, all industries that are in transition right now, with no plan for that to be a just transition for the workers involved. Now, one critique, I've mentioned several critiques I have of my own movement, the labor movement. One critique we have of our environmental allies is that the movement, climate movement and the environmental movement, has never fully grasped the primacy of work in people's lives. And without that, messaging is off. Your messaging is off if you're not, especially if you're going to do outreach to labor. You can't just say, well, we're going to create millions of new jobs, and we'll try to lessen the impact on those of you who are working in this industry today. That's a non-starter for them, because it's through their work in the fossil fuel industry, for example, that they put bread on the table and get their health care and maybe send their kids to college, maybe save for retirement. So you have to come in with sort of a different frame of mind and different talking points, and it's going to be different for every union you talk to. You just heard a great presentation on how nurses view this issue. You'd get a very different presentation from steelworkers and how they view this issue. And that's the first union to ever pass a climate change policy, is the United Steelworkers of America. So they're on board with solving this problem. There are just some hurdles along the path based on who they represent. That's really important to understand. Just transition as a concept is a tricky one for labor, because it immediately implies transitioning from what they do to something else. We're about to release a just transition landscape analysis that explains the various different things that people mean when they use that term, and then points out a pathway to a common vision. That real just transition and how we pay for it is something we should all be working on. Because if we can get that taken care of, we'll have an easier path to solving this climate crisis. So we're basically at a time where we need to compress and escalate our work, and that's what we're all doing within labor, whether it's from our perspective or the perspective of the BlueGreen Alliance, which you'll hear in a minute, which is the largest labor, well, I shouldn't introduce Lee, he's been introduced, but the largest labor environmental coalition ever in history. It really was a great thing when it was founded 10 years ago. So I'll wrap with that and turn it over to Lee to take over this conversation. But just keep in mind that climate insurgency, it's kind of too late for sensible policies. We need to really push, compress and escalate. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Joe. That was excellent. For a moment there, I was afraid maybe I was going to have to be your official counter-protester today, but I think Joe really hit it on the head there with his comment towards the end. I wrote it down. I might have to use this in some of our materials. The climate movement is often not grasping the primacy of work in people's lives. I can't overstate that point. Show of hands. How many labor union members do we have in the room? Come on, blue hands, get them up. Okay, half a dozen, maybe 4 or 5? Okay, I'm overwhelmed. It's good to see you all. Shout them out. What unions do we have in the room?
Former carpenters.
Carpenters.
NEA.
NEA. Musicians.
IFPTE.
IFPT. Obscure but excellent. Yes. I'm sorry? Oh, cinematographers. Excellent. Okay, so a lot of artistic unions in the room. Very cool. I myself am a steel worker. Of course, we have a nurse. Joe, are you a steel worker? Yeah, I thought so. So this illustrates a point. One of the first problems that you encounter is that, for the most part, people don't generally tend to identify themselves with organized labor. They'll say things to you like, well, my dad worked in a mill, or grandpa was a plumber, and oh, maybe Uncle so-and-so was an electrician, I'm not sure. Get that a lot. So right out of the gate, you have to bridge that gap, say, well, organized labor identifies with you, whether or not you identify with them. I mean, we all are enjoying the protections that they won so many years ago and that they continue to protect for us. Problem number 2, to echo something that Joe said, is that statistics will not win your argument. Telling a coal miner that there are going to be 1 million new jobs in 4 years is less than meaningless. It can be insulting. You're asking somebody to give up something tangible that they have in their hand now for something theoretical sometime, maybe, if everything works out just right. That's not even a hard sell. That's an impossible sell. So there's another gap to bridge. And this is exactly the space that the BlueGreen Alliance was designed to get into and occupy. Joe was a part of that back in the day. Somebody somewhere has got to grapple with these very difficult issues head on, and we continue to do that 10 years on. A third point to make here is that labor should not be seen as a monolith. As Joe rightly pointed out, the steelworkers have a climate policy. Another of our partner organizations, the Utility Workers Union, very progressive on climate policy and what we're going to do as this energy transition happens. These are men and women working in coal-fired power plants. What happens when the coal-fired power plant closes in a town of 1,000 people? Nothing good. But their point of view, their perspective is, we got to get in front of this. We got to say, what are we going to do? Rather than getting into an argument about climate change's reality and what the causes of it are and what the causes of the decline of coal are, just say, this is happening, what are we going to do? And then you can just go through the list, a sample platter of the AFL, there's a whole variety of opinions there. For instance, KXL is an excellent one. I know some of you were celebrating that a moment ago. Here's a point on the other side, on the green side of the alliance. The green groups that we work with are very deliberate about not celebrating. They don't use that verb when things like stopping the KXL happen, or they shut down a coal plant, or a coal mine closes. It's like, that happened, let's acknowledge that, let's talk about what we need to do now, right? In fact, I've seen local level activists get in trouble for that. Like, oh yay, we closed the power plant. And the national people will be like, do not say that ever again, because 800 people just lost their job. Why does that all matter anyway? Why do we care? Okay, 800 people somewhere just lost their job. It's the politics, stupid. Joe is correct. All of this is just harder when you're constantly fighting against somebody else who, if they could be one to your side, could actually help you out. And that's where BGA has taken on the long, hard slog of bringing these groups together to say, you can work together on this, you can do this, you just got to change your way of thinking about it and be proactive. Now, many 10 years of work have brought us to a point in time where we have a few things going on here in Washington that I will use by way of example, though there are any number of things out in the States we could also talk about. And when you hear about them, you may be underwhelmed. You think, well, that's not going to rebuild the economy of West Virginia. You are right, it is not. It is as far as the political dialogue has evolved. And I can tell you it is a quantum leap from where people were even 2 years ago, 3 years ago. How many folks here in the room have heard of the obscure but excellent piece of legislation in the House called the Reclaim Act? I know you're all aware. Good. Excellent. What is it? It's $1 billion over 5 years. Existing money in the abandoned mine land fund, it's already there, and this is just a way to push that into the world faster. You think, wow, $1 billion, it's going to be great. It is going to be great. It's a very good step forward, but it's not nearly enough. But that's as far as we've come. And it demonstrates a sea change in the politics, because when you look at who brought that together, it is truly bipartisan. One of its leading sponsors is Hal Rogers, Republican from Kentucky. Supports that bill. That is very different from how things were a few years ago. On the Senate side, we're actually currently working on putting together a bill that is going to focus on specific benefits for workers in the coal industry who have lost their job. For example, unemployment benefits for a really long time, assistance with getting a new job, assistance with getting training, et cetera, et cetera. It's similar to what has been done in the past for folks who lost their job because of international trade, for example. But again, the identified costs in that bill that are built into it are only about $1 billion or so over 5 years. It's not the trillions that Joe is correct in saying that we really do need. We're not going to get trillions now or anytime soon from this town. If things work out favorably, depending on your political point of view, we might get more billions in the next 5 years or so, but that remains to be seen. In the meantime, as climate activists, I think it's just very important, starting from here, to recognize that it's not as easy as simply saying climate change is a huge problem and we have to fix it as fast as we possibly can. And even if you don't care about the people who are affected by the things that we have to do, which nobody is like that, if people care, but even if you are hard-hearted enough to not care about it, there are sensible, practical reasons why you as a climate activist should care, because the politics for you are going to be harder. The more people are pushing against you, saying, you're going to take my $130,000 job away, and you're going to tell me to go 5 states away and get a job at $10 an hour screwing solar panels onto a roof. I don't want that job. I want the job that I have now. I wish that was hypothetical. That's not hypothetical. Okay. For its part, the labor movement also has some work to do here, in that although many of the new jobs that will be coming online are not as high quality as many of the ones that are being lost, really one of the main ways in which to fix that is for organized labor to go out there and organize those new industries, right? For instance, the solar panel industry, installing solar panels is, particularly at the distributed or residential level, is notoriously low-paid, non-union labor. And that's just a situation where organized labor needs to step up and do what it's done for 100 years, organize those workers. But it's important to know that that's not just going to happen by itself. It's not going to happen just because we wish it to be so. There are decades of work ahead of us here, and just transition is going to have to take many forms over many years at every level, federal, state, local level. The Clean Power Plan is a perfect example. As states are out there putting together their plans for how they're going to comply with that, we have been urging, well, we were until it got stayed, that they build right into those plans a plan for just transition for the workers in their states who are going to be affected. Like, all right, you're going to comply with the CPP by building a huge solar farm somewhere. You're going to, ramp up the amount of wind power that's used in your state. That's fantastic. Let's talk about what those jobs look like. Let's talk about what we do with the workers in your state who used to work at that power plant down the road from that wind farm. Let's build that right into the plan. Now, a final point I want to make, and this goes to something that Joe said about, this would have been a great conversation to have 30 years ago. You're right. Of course, 30 years ago, the politics were just intractable. But it's not too late for every part of the country. Although in many ways, it is too late for some parts of the country, particularly in Appalachia in the east. There are still very large mining operations out west. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Powder River Basin. And they're going to be digging coal out of the ground there for a long time. But not forever. And they're going to be digging coal out of the ground in a lot of places for a long time, but not forever. And much of that coal, increasingly, as it gets to be more and more of a Western state proposition, is going to be on public land. And right now, as we speak, I'm sure you're all aware that the government is in the process of reforming how companies pay royalties on the coal that they dig out of the ground. I mean, we could go on at some length. We could have a whole seminar about how that game is rigged. And our point, again, is I don't really care how you fix it. But while you're fixing it and coming up with some new revenue, let's think about what you can do with that money to help workers and communities out there on the front end to get ahead of the curve so that 20 years from now and 30 years from now when PRB, the big mines are shutting down, this doesn't turn into a moonscape out here, because it will. Can we do that? I hope so. Otherwise, Wyoming, Montana will just turn into the next West Virginia and Kentucky. It'll just happen all over again. And I guess that's not my final point. I guess I do have one more last point that I'll say here at the end. If there's been one overarching message that we've heard in all of the presidential campaigns, it's this idea of inequality, wealth inequality, and the corrosive effect that has on the political landscape generally. How does inequality happen? Well, one way it happens is that lots and lots and lots of really good jobs disappear, and we don't do anything to replace them. So, again, a practical reason to care about this stuff, even if you're not concerned about folks who work in the mines or the power plants or whatever, is that the general political landscape is going to become increasingly corroded by increasing inequality as these jobs go away more and more and more. These states will get redder and redder and redder, if that means anything to you. So on that happy note, I think I will stop there. But I'd be glad to take anybody's questions.
We have a question card here. So can one of our interns pick it up? Oh, great. There are more questions than I thought. Fantastic. Oh, right here, miss? She's hiding behind the column. We have a little over 15 minutes, so we should be able to answer some questions. All right, thank you so much to our interns. There are a couple for the panel as a whole, and I'll start with those. All right. First question. If we leave it all in the ground, we won't be able to build the infrastructure for renewable energy. How do we organize this transition? From a former oil and gas geologist. I guess Joe or Lee, would you like to take that one?
I'll have a go at it. Where is that person? That is an excellent question. Thank you. We can only be as green as we can afford to be, right? And we can only be as green as we can manage to create. Solar panels aren't made from fairy dust, are they? They're made from things like rare earth minerals that come from the Congo. Wind power or wind turbines are same thing. They're made of steel. Steel is made out of all kinds of things, including coal. All of these things, all of these clean energy technologies are fantastic, but they can't be just conjured up out of nothing. So it has to taper off over time. The question is, how steep is that slope, and how do we manage the economic impacts as we go down that slope? You're absolutely right. We're all sitting here with a phone in our hand that we charged this morning. Some of us may be off of renewable energy, but many of us off of coal-fired power plants. And that's going to continue to be the case as we make all of this stuff, solar panels, wind farms, et cetera, et cetera. The whole system, making and consuming everything, is just on a slope with fossil fuel usage going like this. And the question is, how do we manage that slope so that we don't crash our whole economy, right? But the point is well taken, and thank you for making it.
All right, we'll rotate a little bit here. I'd like to go with questions that have been submitted to the speakers individually, and we'll start with Katie.
So this question is, will healthcare jobs decline with a healthier environment? And it's always possible that some of them will decline. However, we do have a nursing and physician shortage. So I'm not really worried about my job at this point. And actually, most illness is not caused by the environment. There is a significant amount that is, but I'm not going to be worried significantly about that yet. And as a healthcare provider, we would much rather prevent disease than have people getting sick. So I feel like across the board, the healthcare industry is for healthier environments, even if it may have some impact on the bottom line.
And I believe our REMI report shows job growth in healthcare, so it may not be an issue. So did you want to answer this, or? Sure. Oh, sure. That'd be a good idea to read the questions, wouldn't it? Why don't we go with Joe, and maybe you could read the question first. Is there anyone you'd like to answer?
I'll just take them in order. First one, how do we respond to protests by construction workers supporting new power plant construction in Rhode Island? That's a great question and could apply in any number of states right now. The way we respond is by, depending on the kind of power plant that they're building, is we respond by pointing out other jobs that can be done by the exact same construction unions. Was the whole point of our Clean Energy Futures report and focusing on high quality jobs. Most of the jobs in those reports of ours are in construction and manufacturing. That said, there is no simple answer to someone who's facing losing their job. But that's how we respond. We respond with, if it's a coal-fired power plant, I don't think any of them are being built right now, but we would talk about climate change. But take Keystone, for example. We did a study in the middle of that big debate that followed the path of the Keystone pipeline and pointed out all the jobs that laborers and pipe fitters could have along the same path without building the pipeline, but by doing what the BlueGreen Alliance does such great work on, and that is rebuilding our infrastructure, water, gas, et cetera. So those are the kind of ways we go about it.
All right, thank you very much. And Lee, I think you have a question?
I do. That was a good answer, Joe, and it feeds into this as well. The main point being there that there is not a good answer to a particular individual. There can be pretty good answers on a macro scale, but to a particular individual, they can be difficult. And that feeds into this question. Won't a just transition happen gradually, giving current employees time to retire or transition so the threat to current jobs is minimized? I would say, again, at a macro scale, the things that we're attempting to do legislatively and policy-wise, many people all over the country, we're trying to put things into place so that on a macro scale, yes, that is managed. But on an individual level, if you're a 55-year-old guy working in a coal mine, your dress transition comes in the form of a 60-day WARN Act notice. It says mine's closed in 2 months, figure it out. And bad things happen after that point at an individual level. People at an individual level start, like substance abuse gets to be a problem, bankruptcy, divorce, suicide. I have no good answers for that individual person. All I can do is work at a policy level, at a legislative level, to try and put things into place that are available. And then there is worlds of work to be done by labor activists, climate activists, to try and connect those people with these things and try to make that work for them. A great example, back in the 90s when they had there was a thing called the Clean Air Act Transition Assistance Program. And it was sort of similar. It was a way to take folks out of power plants and get them jobs elsewhere, or mines or wherever. Talking to people who had implemented that back in the day to help design what we're trying to do now, they said, you just about had to take somebody, we were talking about coal mines at the time, you just about had to take somebody who had stood shoulder to shoulder with that guy on the mine face and say, I want to sit you down and talk to you about, let's get your life straightened out. And before we even get to work or retraining benefits, let's talk about why you're drinking so much. Let's talk about why your marriage is going sideways. This is not hypothetical, I'm not making this up. This is a guy who did it back in the day. And then, get them to a place where they could talk rationally about it and then say, hey, here's some benefits, here's some programs that can help you out as an individual. So the answer to your question is kind of, in a way, it can be made gradual, but in other ways, it's very, very sudden.
All right, thank you. I'll take one quickly here for Joe or Lee. For the coal industry, what jobs in those communities might be built upon? I guess in the case of losing your coal mining job. Is there any potential there?
Well, my response to that would be that one of the largest handicaps that many of those communities face is that they're sited in a way that makes them the only employer around, the only game in town. Coal mines aren't in the middle of the city, or neither are power plants. They're out in rural places, right? And so are there opportunities right there locally? Often no. Often the answer is you're going to have to move somewhere else. And there have been programs in the past to help people do that. We're working on a similar thing now. If you have to move, here's some benefits to help you do that. But if you just, 800 people have just been laid off at the power plant in a town of, 2,000, no. You're going to have to go somewhere else. And there's an important point here in that it can be tempting on both sides to try and come up with easy answers and or to point fingers, but that's always a losing battle. The only thing you can really do is just talk in rational, deliberate terms about practical solutions, as practical as you can make them for the people who are going to be in that situation.
All right, thank you, Lee. And Joe, another question?
Okay. I have two here with real quick answers. One is actually addressed to Joe and Lee. Do you work with state politicians on environmental justice or renewable job training legislation? The quick answer for me is not so much. We do some state level work, but we're not funded to do much of it. I think the BlueGreen Alliance does a fair bit more than we do. The second question is, as a planner involved in the Break Free Midwest event in Whiting, Indiana at the BP plant, several orgs wanted to talk about just transition. We're working class union people. Are you looking for support in your just transition work? And the answer is yes, and I'm sure the BlueGreen Alliance is as well. So we're all ears for anybody who wants to work on this stuff.
Yes, let me just emphasize that point. Yes, we are looking for support. I wish it was part of your lobby day this week. How can I say this? The need for constituent support on this issue could not be greater. And you don't have to be a member of a labor union to do this. You know, we need climate activist support as well. One of the best organizations actually on this is the Sierra Club. They have as many of you know, a vast network of activists, and they have put that into motion, or willing to put that into motion on this issue to work on just transition issues. But we could all use your support as well.
Thank you. We're coming towards the end of our time, and so I will ask the last question. As a little background to our speakers, we are nonpartisan, as you probably know. Most of us are Democrats, I think, but we feel strongly that an effective climate bill should have reasonable bipartisan support, and we have concentrated really on Republicans, since they've been more intransigent about dealing with climate change, not to mention that they are now the ones in power. So here's a question. As a CCL lobbyist, I advocate a revenue-neutral carbon fee so I can tell Republicans that it won't grow government. It sounds like, from the panelists, to support labor as we deal with climate, we must develop some government programs with our carbon fee revenue and spend money. How can we reconcile these two?
Well, I would say that the Clean Energy Future Report that I talked about is based on no new costs. So you can certainly use that. We do, but like I said, we consider it a floor, and we believe more is needed. But I agree with what Lee said. We're not on the cusp of spending trillions of dollars on this problem right now. So the Clean Energy Future Report is a way to go about it without spending a lot of new money.
Dave, I understood that question to be, how do we talk Republicans into designing big government programs, which is an awesome question. I think there's an answer. I think there's an answer. We, however you want to say it, just saw this in a sort of smaller way with the Reclaim Act. I think the answer is that you get actual constituents, actual real human beings who live out in the congressional districts to do the old-fashioned thing of talking to their congressmen. People who actually live and work in West Virginia and Kentucky and Virginia and Pennsylvania, et cetera, go to your congressman and work it. That's what I mean when I say I need help. I need folks like that from all over these affected regions to come and tell their stories, right? I'm from Iowa, which has its own economic challenges that don't have to do with coal, so I can only go so far with this. I need people from the places to come and talk about it. That's how I would answer the question.
Thank you all for coming, and thanks so much to our panelists for their enlightening information. We really do appreciate it, and let's give them another round of applause.